feels that you felt, his communications is one of the most important things. So one best way to handle your non-Indian kind of Western clients is that you need to be very comfortable with their language, okay, and you need to be quite expressive and articulate. So this means that you control, balance, and say the best suited words to them. And some of you will have it probably very, very naturally, and some of them will probably gain over a period of time. That's number one. And this is the front end. And immediately behind this front end is the back end, where you have, your skill set and knowledge and etc. etc. As a uh, uh, as a business analyst, or as a scrum master or whatever. Yep. So the technical competence is level 2, but the first and foremost, they definitely need you to be a very, very rightly communicating Indian. Okay. And trust me, if you have that knowledge, have that strength of the language, then you can really cross most of the other, kind of bars, if there are any, with your client. Yep. So just make sure that that part is good. So this takes you different places, gives you a lot of different experiences. So I had a fair share of my experiences, across US, across Stockholm, Finland, Denmark, Germany to a large extent, and Singapore, and it was very good experiences, in terms of, because when you go there, you're in front of the client. I mean, frankly, they are not very, first of all, they are not really like a great task masters. So they want you to have a balanced kind of a thing, right? And like, for example, to be very honest with you, in India, for example, you may have seen that it's like become a 24/7 kind of a shop, right? I mean, the workloads have really increased, and there's no denying the fact that the work stress is very high in India. But when you are not in India, it's way more balanced. You feel very relaxed, and hence your productive inputs are really, I would say, it's really better. It's really better than in India. So it's very nice, and I'm glad that you, in this role, you'll be able to probably do all that. Yep. Okay, so shall we step on to our PPT now, guys? Yeah. Okay. Let me do a full screen. So this is where we were yesterday. Okay, Scrum as a rugby unit. So rugby unit, where all of you act as a team. You cross into the opposite team's territory. You have to reach a certain distance to do the ball touchdown, and all along the way you play a very iterative kind of a game by making the ball pass on within your own team members till the time you reach the designated place. Yep, this was till yesterday. Now let's look at Scrum, because that's the lifeline of this whole thing. Yeah, let's look at in different viewpoints. One view of Scrum I would like to give you, which is like, hey, can you explain Scrum in 10 words? Scrum is an agile process. Yeah, like one of the many agile processes. It's one of the agile process focusing on delivering the right business value. So guys, this thing will be very important. Yeah. So remember, always, it's the keyword in here, in entire agile spectrum. The keyword is business value. Okay, and that too in a very short interval of time. So ask me how. 2 weeks of sprint, you already complete a functionality, deploy it. Obviously, business is going to enjoy that, right? So imagine, from user story to deployment, 2 weeks only. Okay, even it's a small component probably. Yeah, it's a very small component of the overall change. But the fact is that you were able to deploy that, coming from the monstrously long, 9 to 10 months or 1 year of waterfall cycles, where business actually saw value, but after a long time. Here, you deliver business value in 2 weeks. Then they try that functionality. They know in another 4, 5, 7 weeks whether that functionality is delivering the greatest of business value, however little it might be, or they need to suggest a change in it, which again comes back to you and then again parks itself in the product backlog. Yeah. So when you have a second time discussion on that requirement, what they do is the baseline or the benchmark at that point of time is your existing functionality which you put into the system maybe a couple of weeks back. There's a discussion on top of it, right? What happens is it leads to a further evolution of that functionality. Because it's small, the discussion is quite microscopic and in detail. When that happens, more and more doors and windows open regarding what is the best suitable change you can bring. Business is very clued on, users community with product owner is very, very clued on to that same discussion. So what happens, really the flowers of business value open. You don't open any flowers like that. But when there's so much of collaboration between IT and business, those flowers really open and you're able to see the real essence of the value which must go in. But it's easy because by the time you're so clear that what is the value business is asking, 90% of the time, a typical change manager doesn't get to understand that, because if the changes are so large, it's very difficult to get to the real time understanding of what value the business is asking for, because it remains at a high level. Okay, so that is why describing Scrum as which gives a business value in shortest time is the perfect definition. Okay, so as I said, some of the slides will just pass through. Yeah, Scrum in 25 words. It's an agile process focusing on highest business value. Second, the business sets the priorities. Third, the developers self-organize to determine what to deliver to give the highest priority features. Scrum in 50 words. Just adding a fourth line. Scrum utilizes rapid and recurrent review of work products. Rapid, fast, agile, and recurrent, again and again kind of a happening review of work products. And that is what takes the product towards product excellence. Scrum in 64 words. Same thing, except one thing has been added. Every 2 or 4 weeks, anyone can see real working product increment, which may or may not be released to the customers. So product increments, I just suggested, right? That when you when a subsequent change comes back to you via product backlog, right? You again make a change to that functionality, and then again it gets deployed. In this process, yeah, what happens is that you are incrementally changing the nature of the product. So keep this in mind. Increment value addition to the product through incremental changes which are suggested by business and comes via product backlog and goes into recurrent sprints and eventually gets redeployed again and again. But that is the evolution of the product. And it is this evolutionary cycle which gives the best business value. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead. Scrum in 100 words. What's the incremental thing they have put here? Every 2 weeks to a month, we can see real working software, blah, blah, blah. Team self-organizes to determine the best value. It allows us to repeatedly inspect the working software. All right, all clear? This is fine. Okay, now let's look at Scrum process in greater details. So we're going to look at, guys, 3 components. One, Scrum artifacts, deliverables, whatever you want to call them. Second, the Scrum process by itself. Third is the Scrum rules. All right, step by step. Okay, very transparent, very easy, very clear to understand. First, during product backlog. Yeah, the most initial stage where you are in stage 0, which is also called sprint planning. A prioritized list of high-level requirement comes in. Second, sprint backlog. A list of tasks to be completed during the sprint. So first, product backlog is there. It is there all the time. You take an extract from product backlog and you call it a sprint backlog. Why? Because you want to accomplish those tasks, those changes during the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of sprints. Once you enter the sprint, there's a burn down chart, which is like a KPI, where a progress chart measures estimated hours remaining. So you have an estimation, for each sprint cycle, because each sprint cycle has about 5 changes. Each changes is broadly 10 hours, so you have a 50-hour sprint. So if you complete 30, 20 more to go, that's your sprint burn down chart. And then comes Scrum board, the board where you stick all the tasks, activity which have been accomplished yesterday, which are going to be done today, which are going to be further done tomorrow. So the past, the present and future are all on visible display on a board in the room. Okay, and that is what is called the Scrum board. So typically, as a Scrum master, remember product backlog, sprint backlog, burn down chart, Scrum board, one of your principal responsibilities. So this is, guys, what a Scrum board looks like. So if you see, there are simple post-its which are mentioning what are the user stories, let's say a team is working on, what is the status of those user stories, what are the challenges in these user stories, what did the team did on that thing yesterday. So for example, some component was developed, few of them were tested, and then some additional design change was made. Today we are expecting more design changes to come, and then we'll expect the coder programmer to change the code to some extent, and then we'll expect the tester to run those scripts towards the end of the evening, right? So all that kind of a plan is visibly displayed. This is, guys, how it looks like in a little more detailed view. What is the backlog? Are there how many epics are running? Okay, what are the typical user stories which are right now going on? What is the progress on that same, which means how many are work in progress and how many are done? So typically it's a 5-column kind of an exercise. Let me check if it's being recorded. Is it being recorded? Yep, it's being recorded. Fine. Yep, no, that's good. That's good. I just wanted to cross check, right? Okay, carrying on. Okay, then, guys, there is something called a task board. So you looked at the Scrum board, right? Let's look at a task board. The task board shows all the work we are doing during the sprint. Step number 1. Step 2, we keep continuously updating it throughout the sprint, right? So if someone thinks of an add-on additional task, okay, so remember, guys, in Scrum, the tasks are not as per a standard protocol. Since the team creativity is given a high precedence, so let's say during the sprint cycle, if you suggest some kind of an add-on task which you think will add value to the overall development, because maybe, let's say, some of maybe some important critical stuff probably was not getting tested, it was somehow being ignored, And at some point of time we realized that we need to test those things as well, so we just added two three maybe additional testing scenarios to the overall cycle. So what happened, you if you did that, now obviously you contained the risk. Yeah. You were probably able, you, you will be able to deliver a better business value. You will create more predictability for further functionality to remain stable in the production system. So if you know that there are so many additional things we can achieve, it's absolutely all right if you suggest an add-on task which probably may increase the sprint cycle, for example, by a day or something. Okay, or the team might be able to make up actually within the designated time. Yep, but the fact is that such kind of creativity is very, very thoroughly encouraged. So advantage of task board is, if you think of a new task, just put it on a paste it and just put it up on the wall. So another part of the story is change in estimation. So the change can be during the scrum or sprint cycle or before the sprint cycle. If there are any estimates which are changed, whether in upward or downward direction, the cards are moved around the board. So if some change has come in during the middle of it, we don't have to shy it away. We can incorporate those changes, except for the fact that we just notify on the task board that what add-on has come in, and hence the total estimation has increased by few hours or whatever. Some query here is task board part of user story? No guys, it's not. It's part of scrum master's job. Once the user story comes in, you sit with the product manager, get the approval on few user stories, then you prioritize them. All right, and after that it comes into development cycle. So frankly, you are already in the middle of the development cycle because you are managing a task board which is already there, and which is notifying us, updating us on all the different activities which we need to do. So it's not part of the user story. It's way beyond that. So then what's the task board? What does it exactly do? Task board, basically it has a story. So the story says, it's basically the user story. It says, hey, as a user, I want to add 3 new fields to the report so that apart from the product wise, I can get a pack wise sales report as well. So they just want to make a change by adding the packs as well. So toothpaste, right? So we have a toothpaste sales as of now at a cumulative level, but now user wants to add, that he needs to have the sales of the toothpaste from 200 grams, 100 grams pack, 50 grams pack, pouches, etc. So that's like a change. Taskboard also updates on the work in progress. Yep. So all the tasks which are work in progress, they have a very significant WIP row, written on the top of their task part. Then there's a verification regarding, let's say, a lot of tasks have corresponding test task cards. So you put up a card for a user story, you update the same user story, in a different card, saying that it's work in progress, what has been, how many SDLCLs, phases have has been accomplished. Okay, and then you basically have to map and match that. If you have put 3 task cards suggesting the changes are now, for example, in testing, then you have to make sure that your test, the card which is updating the progress on test cases, has that details of those 3 changes which are being tested. Yeah, so just make sure that everything is balanced out. And then as soon as you keep closing some tasks, right, so they are like falling into the definition of done. So then those kind of cards are removed at the end of the sprint. Okay, just a quick view on sprint burn down chart, guys. So you can use that in any ways. So look at it in this case. The x-axis is the iterations which are carrying out. Yeah. And the y-axis is basically showing the work in hours. So during first iteration, we were at 100 remaining hours. As we came down, our progress was a little slow because at iteration number 2, we were sitting at about 90. And then at third, we were at about again somewhere little less than 90, even though I think we should have been at about 80, because you see guys, in 10 iterations you have to accomplish 100 hours. So if you see average per iteration, or sorry, per 10 hours, you should be completing one iteration. So your second iteration should be at 90, third should be at 80, etc. But during, if you see iteration 2 to iteration 7, the progress was kind of a little slow, and it continued to remain slow till 8th iteration, before by 9th iteration we caught up with the median value. Okay, so this is sprint burn down. So this is one of the major KPIs which you have to publish. Okay, now that till now we were talking sprint artifacts. Now let's talk sprint process. So what is there in sorry, I'm talking sprint scrum process. Scrum process, guys, consists of three things. One, daily scrum, which you remember is the daily scrum stand-up meeting. Okay, three questions. You as a scrum master will ask only three questions to the team. What have you done yesterday? What do you want to do today? Do you have any challenges? That is why typically in a sprint team of 10, whether it's 10 or it's 5, scrum stand-up meeting is only for about 15 minutes, because during that time each member is asked three questions, and when they respond, based on that, that discussion happens within the team, and then they sit down for work. Okay, second is of course the sprint, because we have already conceived the sprints, number of sprints I mean, and then what is the duration of each sprint, and then what changes are already gone into each sprint, right? So suppose you created 10 sprints, say you as a scrum master, you bulk them up, with that thing during the sprint planning meeting, and then every sprint knows that what all changes it has into itself, so all the members of the sprint team also get a fair idea about it. Okay, the third one is sprint retrospective, again third portion of the process of scrum. Retrospective of course is towards the end, where you inspect and adapt. Yep. Sprint retrospective, guys, can be a short meeting, it can be a long meeting. When I say short as 30 minutes. No, there's no confusion. Everybody agrees that what best could be done has been done, and what changes have been developed are to the best value of business. If there's any discussion on that, it means these sprint retrospective meetings may shift, from current half an hour to 1 hour to 2 hours, or even to 4 hours. But the fact is, guys, why a lot of credibility is given to sprint retrospective, because in sprint cycle, typically you've seen that if you want, You can learn a lot from your failures. So whatever failures that you might encounter, you should be able to, kind of learn from them, and then don't replicate that mistake in the next sprint. So if you see, guys, again, the same thing. There's no big tool and technique kind of a thing. It's more of a very commonsensical, value added kind of a work that is being done. And that is what is agile for you. Okay, so all right, now let's look at just a view, guys, just a view for a few seconds. So you first form a vision, okay, between product owner and business analyst. Vision for the sprints. Then you sit in sprint planning exercise and you create a product backlog. Then from product backlog, you create a sprint backlog. All right. And then you have that 12 to, 24 hours kind of a first level window, followed by about 2 to 4 weeks of the regular sprint cycle. Okay, so that's fine. I think these diagrams are probably, since you understand the concept, I think. Okay, the third portion, guys, after the Scrum artifact, Scrum process, comes the Scrum principles. Okay, clearly you need a right workspace, which means a co-location of all the team members, no physical barriers, very transparent, open communications. Management does not do a micro management of yours, right? So all these kind of flexibility and liberties are required by the team to act in a perfectly coordinated manner. Okay. So again, from a people perspective, it's very important that you should have a self-organizing, self-motivating, skilled teams, right? Who can do the needful point here, and of course they should be cross-functional. All right. Now let's look at some of the, what we call the roles in an overall Scrum. I think you will be probably familiar with quite a few of them. I think we have had a briefing on this. So guys, what I showed you as a cartoon earlier, yeah, this one has a meaning. So there is something called pigs and chicken roles, yeah, in a Scrum team. Let me just adjust my microphone this way. Yeah. Okay. Good. So we have something called pig and chicken roles in Scrum. So let's understand what it is. The Scrum framework, yeah, includes dedicated people. We know that, who are known as either pigs or chickens. And then there is a Scrum Master. Okay. So everybody except the Scrum Master is either a pig or a chicken. While it may sound strange, if you look at the idea behind Scrum, it makes some sense. I'll tell you how. The role of chickens and pigs are based on an old joke. Yep. Actually, it's based on a joke. Let me remember, somewhere I have that story. Yeah. I remember the story now. A pig and a chicken, are walking down a road. The chicken looks at the pig and says, "Hey, why don't you open a restaurant?" This is the cartoon there, right? Now the pig looks back at the chicken and says, "Good idea. What do you want to call it?" The chicken says, "Why don't you call it ham and eggs?" Right? Pig says, "No, no, I don't think so, because I would be committed, but you would only be involved." Right? So basically, the pigs build or manage a project using Scrum, while the chickens have an interest but are not responsible for the project, whether it fails or succeeds. However, chickens do have a role. They provide important feedback to the project. So the project that will produce a keychain with the client logo, for example, will use pigs, who are actually the development team. And the chickens will be represented by the vendors, who will be responsible for selling that keychain. Okay, but chickens will not be responsible for delivery of the project. So you guys, you got the chicken and egg story. So I'll tell you, for example, I'll tell you who are the chicken roles in a Scrum cycle. First of all, users. You remember the users, which are under the product owner, right? So the users are considered the people, or who will utilize the product or the service, and they will actually just use the product. Then there are stakeholders, or maybe vendors or whoever, who will probably be responsible to sell your product, right? So they will only be able to offer a feedback, etc. So what you see on the screen are the pig roles: the team, which is designer, developers, testers, and then scrum master, and then the product owner. Yeah. And then there are chicken roles: typically end users, for whom the software is built; stakeholders, which is the business side; and management, which is the organization side. So you got that right. The typically the lighter roles, which are not really, put their head uh, into the into the delivery cycle. Okay. Again, a refresh. As you understand, Agile prefers interactions over process and tools. A working software over a comprehensive documentation, right? And I think this is something which you have seen earlier also. So collaboration over negotiation, response over following a fixed plan. So, all right, let's put it all together, guys. So look at this. Initial planning gives rise to product backlog. Via product owner, you create the sprint planning. Do the sprint planning meeting, which leads to creation of a sprint backlog. Put it into the sprint cycle, where then scrum masters, scrum team will get involved, who will do a sprint review, who will do a daily scrum, who will do analyze, build, design, who will do testing. Then there'll be a sprint retrospective, and then it will go towards deployment. What is getting deployed? A potentially minimum shippable product. Just look at that diagram and please fix that in your mind. Just fix the diagram in your mind. And let me know if you have any kind of a query here. All right. Oh, wow. All right. Product backlog leads to sprint planning meeting, leads to sprint goals, daily scrum, backlog, impediments, if any, product increments keep happening, leads to the burn down where you are now, planning to review what is completed, what is not yet completed. Don't forget the sprint burn down chart at the bottom. You start with 8 changes to be done in the product backlog. Yeah, post the first sprint, you have reduced them from 8 to 6. From 6, you have gone down to 4. So with every sprint cycle, you are completing and deploying 2 products into the deployment cycle. All right, if you see your burn down, that is going at the rate of the hours estimated for 2 changes every sprint cycle. But if you see, the core of every sprint is the same. You got daily scrum, you got daily work, you got a sprint goal to achieve, you have a sprint backlog to achieve, you're encountering and mitigating impediments, and hence you're continually updating and improving the product via product incremental cycles. This diagram is really nice. I think you should remember it very well. Is there any query, guys? Please post it. Yeah, Savan. So DevOps I have not included here because then the diagram gets very, very complex. So probably there down the line there is obviously comprehensive diagrams which show both. But remember, right now we are understanding the Scrum process, right? So Scrum process, Scrum roles, Scrum artifacts, etc. So that's why you're not looking at the DevOps right now. Okay, this is fine. If you look at this slide, guys, it's quite obvious. Scrum believes in sequential development. So rather than doing everything together, when I say everything together, all requirements build up in the requirement phase, all design build ups in the design phase. No, 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 we don't want to do that. We don't want to do it all at a time. We want to do little at a time. All right. Once you embark on a sprint cycle, guys, you can't be changing much. Okay. Hey, what's this language which is coming up? Wow, I see some Korean language here. If it is Korean. Okay, but I guess you understand this diagram. Okay, now let's look at the Scrum framework. So roles we have already understood: product owner, Scrum master, and the team. Of course, split amongst these are all pigs. Chickens are separate. And then we have the sprint ceremonies, which means small events which happen during the sprint cycle. Yeah. So sprint planning exercise is a ceremony. Sprint review is a ceremony. Daily sprint, daily scrum meeting is a ceremony. Sprint retrospective at the end of the sprint is a ceremony. Okay, and you also saw the deliverables, right? Product backlog, sprint backlog, burn down chart. So essentially, guys, it's 4 plus 3 plus 3. 10 things which care for the entire scrum framework. Really not very difficult if you want to do that way. Okay, now I want to introduce you what roles are active during the various stages of Scrum. So, goodness me, multiple sprints in a Scrum, damn it, get it now. Okay, sorry, Scrum, we're talking Scrum, guys, now. Yeah, so I want to take you through various stages of Scrum, okay, to tell you which role is what active. Now, first and foremost, initiation of the Scrum. This is before we do any sprint planning. Sprint planning is what we call sprint zero. Okay. So, guys, initiation. So now imagine you and me are all new scrum masters, and we are already with a new client who are moving from waterfall to agile, so we want to begin with them. So obviously we need to begin well, which means at the initiation stage, right, we must put in first of all the entire setup. So setup of project governance, setup of quality processes. Yep, which means please put up the right configuration, environments. You please put up the right coordinates. Strike a handshake with your project coordinators and stakeholders. Create a project plan. Get your team onboarded. Identify if they have any training needs. Please identify if they are cross vertical, they are cross functional, they are good to go, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that is, remember, by the way, that's the project manager's job. So in the roles, by the way, remember, you are the scrum master. There will be some project manager of the project as well. So frankly, guys, these are the admin tasks which I'm leaving to a project manager. Coordinations here and there, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that's good. Then comes, of course, the chief. To be honest, chief to some extent is the product owner. Yeah, coming from the client side or the business side. So he's responsible to get all the business help, right? Prioritizations, etc., etc., all done by him. Then comes the hero, grandmaster, sorry, scrum master. Identifies everything from a team perspective. Is my team cross functional? Ready? Yes. Does my team need any further trainings? Yes or no? Right? Guides to say, hey, is all the agile tools there? For example, let's say all the, eventually later the DevOps as well, right? All the DevOps tools are there, not there, etc. Then he has to say all the agile processes are there. So process, framework, etc., which will be the right milestones to be achieved, it's his job. So guys, agile is not an easy thing, right? It's a complex one. That's why there are multiple roles who are caring for all that. Project manager, product owner, scrum master, etc. Now this is the initiation. Remember, during initiation, the team has not really as such ramped up. Okay. Okay, so at least I mean, we are our preparations are all through. Fine. Then let's step into sprint zero. Now the flavor of sprint is coming in. Okay. So flavor of sprint is coming in. How? Now we are trying to plan. Sprint zero is all about real time planning. So the plan is in initiation stage. At the time of sprint zero, we have already stepped into planning. Okay, because planning is the successor of plan. What do we do here? And by the way, who's active? As of now, let's still stick to the same roles: project manager, product owner, scrum master, and the team. Now, the team is an addendum into sprint zero, or let's call it sprint planning exercise. Oh, and they were not there in the initiation first. Okay. So where are we? the talking about release planning has started. So project manager initiates that. Now what is that? Hey guys, when are we talking the release? Okay, today's 1st August. We are talking about the release on 30th August. Okay, 4-week cycle. Fair enough. Yeah. So fix the release planning first. Okay. And then the product owner starts prioritizing the requirements based on the user stories, which have already come from users. Okay. Now, this time the Scrum Master gets active and the BA also gets quite active along with the product owner. So typically the business analyst, okay, aligns more with the product owner because the prioritization of the user stories, etc., has to be set. Guys, I hope this table is making it clear, right? Okay. So product owner is identifying user stories, use cases, because now he's fixed to the sprint that are going to be built in. So identifying user stories, use cases, sprints, etc., and then defining the goals of release and sprint both. So now product owner is more specific. He's defining the goal of the release. So in this release, we will have probably 2 sprints of 2 weeks each. And hence we'll accomplish, let's say, 8 to 10 changes, and hence the goal of so and so. What is the goal? Hey, in those 2 sprints we are doing 10 changes. This will care for all the objectives of supply chain management which we want to accomplish for the business user that we have committed to. That's a goal, right? So it's just like detailed planning, nothing much about that, right? Scrum master assists the product owner. So remember guys, there may or may not be a significant role of a business analyst, because in smaller scrum cycles, frankly, the scrum master is able to assist the product owner in terms of planning, identifying the scope, creating some detailed estimates, right? And then of course having a good discussions with the rest his own team about number of applications requirement, database designs, whatever. So there is a BA. But remember, team is cross-functional, so the BA is probably a tester as well. So BA is a tester as well. Tester is a programmer as well. Programmer can do testing also, or he can do technical architectural design also, right? So 3 people can care for 6 skills. So it's very cross-functional. Okay, but of course, purely requirement-based discussions are done between business analyst and product owner. But you see here, the Scrum Master is overall helping the product owner to put up the right project plan, identify the right scope, and create the estimates. So the estimates, we will do it in something called, we are not here reach there. So how we estimate each change is through something called playing poker. So we will reach that game yet, and then you can understand. But yes, at right this stage, we are discussion are that that the Scrum Master assists the product owner in terms of fixing the estimates, and that is how the length and duration of the sprint cycle is decided, and that is how it is fitted into the release planning. So remember, release planning comes first, then comes prioritization of changes, then comes the estimation of changes, then out of that we pick and choose only those many whose estimates is falling within next 30 days. Okay, all right. So we completed sprint 0. That was the planning part. So initiation, plan, sprint 0, planning. Now comes the real sprint because it has begun. Okay, project manager as usual is handling stakeholders. He's doing metrics, publication of metrics, because remember someone you asked me PMO. So the PMO office, project manager office, is managed by project manager. So he's measuring the sprint progress in terms of how many hours done, how many hours remaining. So he's responsible to publish the sprint burn down chart. So as a scrum master, you analyze the scrum burn down chart and then accordingly guide the team whether they should go fast or slow. Okay, now you remember we are doing 2 3 sprints, right? It's covered under one scrum. But remember, once this particular scrum is for supply chain, there's another parallel scrum which is for a separate thing altogether, probably for database designs, right? So there are 2 3 scrums going on. Each scrum has its own product owner, each scrum has its own project manager, and each scrum has its own scrum master. Now, the database design is obviously dependent on the functionalities you are going to develop and vice versa. Basically, what I mean is the two Scrum teams must be talking to each other. This means after a particular period of time, let's say 1 week, 3 days, or something like that, the different Scrum teams should be coming together to sit for a common discussion also, because that's a common overlap between multiple sprint Scrum teams. So the project manager facilitates that. Okay. So now the sprint has already begun. Day-to-day operations are going on. Project manager cares for that. Product owner's presence is obligatory in sprint planning to clarify user stories and priorities. So he must be there. So he or she updates the product backlog, enters new stories which are coming from business, refines the epics. So epic is a collection of user stories. So he'll update the epics. Epic 1 has 5, epic 2 has 7, epic 3 has 10 user stories. So he keeps updating them because about the same user story he keeps hearing more and more details from business. So he wants to clarify that particular user stories better and better. So product owner keeps updating that, right? So epics get refined, user stories get refined, product backlog gets updated, and prioritization and reprioritization keeps on happening. Okay, so then comes our showman, Scrum Master. So Scrum Master guy sets up sprint processes. You just learned about Scrum processes, right? And he just guides the team, conducting daily stand-up meetings, noting down challenges, taking help a product owner from a management perspective to help it out, facilitating those challenges to get a solution with project manager, resolving those issues, conducting a sprint review, conducting sprint retrospective, right? So honestly, guys, if you look at Scrum Master doesn't have a hands-on role, hands-on in terms of coding, testing, etc. But otherwise, it's a very, very involved role with the team. Yeah. And then of course is the team which is doing estimates. Then it is designing, building, testing user stories, changes based on or requirement based on user stories, and it helps to update the sprint backlog, delivers the deliverables, then prepares the POCs, demos, obtains feedback on the user stories or functionality which have been completed, right? And actively participate in retrospective. So if you see, guys, couple of important terms regarding the team, regarding the process terminology, regarding the artifacts and deliverables completes this Scrum cycle pretty well. Okay, so guys, see, if you want to ask me a question, which obviously I won't mind, saying that Mukhraj, the Scrum Master doesn't seem to be having his hands very full. right, in terms of work. I want to make your understanding very clear. Scrum Master is responsible for all deliverables of the sprint. And who's doing that for him is the team. So essentially, guys, remember the success of your sprint also depends a lot on the actual requirements. So this means there's a lot of dependency on product owner. Hence, Scrum Master is also very active to keep that dependency very clear on product manager owner, so that you can get just the right details from them. And then product Scrum Master passes on those details to the team to keep their understandings intact. So what I'm trying to say here is Scrum Master has a large role to play in terms of dealing with product owner. That is why it's very important for you to understand what exactly does the product owner do. See, he defines the feature of the product, what he needs. He decides on the release date, and that's how the sprint planning is done. He is responsible for the profitability of the product. So you remember we make those business cases, right? Where we say the business case, the return on investment should be good, the cost benefit analysis should be right, etc., etc. Right? That is where it's accountability of the product owner to make that happen. So frankly, if the business case falls through, it will be considered as a problem of the product owner. All right. Then you say, hey, our business cycle should be bang on, right? Our business cycle in terms of business benefit should be bang on. That's where I say, please, somebody, for heaven's sake, prioritize the products or the features according to the market value. So how is market deliberating? How is market wanting to accept the right value from your product development? So basically, guys, what I mean to say is product owner is the nodal point or the pivotal point, to have all the market related info in here. Because according to the most competitive trends, you know whatever is the likelihood that the best features can be accorded, to uh, the to the product, it has to come from product owner. Okay, so that's a product owner from you. Oh my god, look at this ninja. This is the good old product scrum master, by the way. That's you. Represents the overall management of the product, or represents the management to the project, responsible for enacting scrum values and practices. So remember, somebody is going to compare the scrum practices or framework which is being implemented in this project. So remember, guys, i'm I also sometimes do, like a agile consulting role, which means that I understand the requirement of the client, which, in many cases, like what they want to they want to basically set up a team and implement the agile processes from beginning to end, right? So this means they need someone to create that project scrum framework. They want to institutionalize that practices. They want somebody to mentor the team, care for the team, nurture the team, and kind of initiate them into the Scrum cycle right from beginning. So it's more of a consulting approach. Yeah, and this is what also is the role of a Scrum Master. So eventually, in 2 years or something, when you have a sufficient hands-on experience, you are likely to do this kind of a consulting projects, right? Where you'll act as a consultant. So, ensuring that the team is fully productive. Now, it's easier to say, hey, my team is fully productive, but what you have to do, you have to ensure that they are cross-trained. You have to ensure that they have all the right functional inputs to themselves. You should know that they are hands-on over functional and technical situations both, right? So, all that stuff. Another important part about Scrum Master is, guys, that he has to shield the team from any external intervention. Now, how do you protect the team from any micromanagement which keeps happening in case it happens? Typically, on a Scrum team, what happens is the management doesn't interfere, because honestly, that's not the way the team operates. So, management teams are very sure that they have to leave that management of the team actually onto the Scrum Master. Okay, so that is the given thing. I mean, obviously, it falls into the part and parcel of the Scrum part. So even uh, frankly, it's like a no bother situation. So they don't really bother you that way. So guys, please look at the screen very carefully, because that's you. Good to go. Then comes your team. Okay, typically, guys, not more than 5 to max to 9 to 10 people. Okay, cross-functional in terms of not just programming and testing. Many of them are likely or must have a user experience designing skill as well. Okay, so this is, guys, some new kind of a skill called UX specialists. So UX refers to user experience or user interface. So what they do is, what does a user experience mean? So when user sits with the system, what does how does he interact with the system? That's via some graphical user interfaces, right? Those GUIs. So redesign and design those GUIs so that the likability from the GUI perspective. Likability means the screen enables the users to conduct his transaction, but in a most likable, fun, and interesting manner. You can design a screen very, very flat. You can design a screen very, very, very interesting also. But that's the role of, what we call design specialists. So, that's what typically, guys, covers under the topic of design thinking also, by the way. Yeah. Okay. So cross-functional skills actually grows once you enter into a larger project, guys. Then your cross-functional perspectives will be the team will keep getting larger. So if team keeps getting larger, you will have more and more cross-functional skills within your team. So I mean, that's how obviously your Scrum perspective keeps getting better and better. See, after all, you have to enjoy you have to enjoy the work as well, right? So you enjoy the work when slowly your team begins to expand. You have more and more skill sets, and that is how you have more and more exposure. Skill set increases. Now, example, like suppose tomorrow you have a team which has UX specialists as well. You will yourself keep getting a lot of exposure to how those user experience are designed, how those a typical connect directly with the user is established. So then your design specialist sit with your user and via business analyst takes out the requirements which are purely from user experience perspective. That's something very new to you. Yep. Okay. That's fine. Sprint organizing, etc., etc., etc. Oh, fantastic. Hey, this is something called where we are introducing, you know, some kind of a class discussion. We can probably spend some, kind of a definite time on this because that's really useful. So, guys, I wanted to clarify some differences between the business analyst and the product owner. So, am I valid to say that till now, whatever we have done, I'm sure that we are not very clear what is the role of a business analyst in an agile cycle? Because till the time we have not really even talked about it too much. We are talking only about two showmen here, the product owner and the scrum master, right? So I wanted to bring forward that what is the exclusive role of a business analyst and a product owner, and what is the common role of a business analyst and product owner. One thing is clear, guys: product owner and business analysts are not very far from each other, right? Okay, see, look at the left hand side here, the usually a BA. You have read that all and understood that in your business analysis module, right? Non-functional requirement, functional requirement, requirement strategy, modeling, aligning the business architecture, etc. And usually a product owner goes for a business strategy. So BA does requirement strategy, product owner does a business strategy. BA does a project focus or requirement focus, PO does a customer focus. So if you see, a product owner is a lot caring for user, competitive situation, business priorities, business engagement, and so on, because he's a business guy. Yeah. Now the middle part is something which both a BA and PO can do, which is how to craft a product strategy. That if we are developing a product and we are redeveloping and further developing and evolving it, looking at the overall competitive product landscape, how much you want to evolve your product, to how much extent, is something which can be related to things like, hey, who's going to prepare a business case, who's going to gather the storyline here, who's going to do the story writing, who's going to do the cost benefit analysis. Frankly, anybody of the two can do. So typically, if it is a large project, you have a very active BA and a very active product owner. If it is not a large project, you may have a one role being very active and other role being a little dominant, which basically means you may not have two senior fellows in your team as a business analyst and product owner both. Because frankly, we don't need two very senior chaps if a project is not very large. But if you remember, guys, the Chinese philosophy or yin and yang, right? Product owner and BA are typically the yin yang of a project. So yin yang is two very important halves, of, let's say, a human being, for example, is considered to be a yin yang, which means not that everybody's a male and everybody, of course, either you are a male or a female, but the fact is, in every male there is some female aspects, in every female there are some male aspects. So this is the conjoined nature of which leads to a better development of people. Yep. So, but anyways, since why you need to understand this, you need to understand that, guys, because these guys will be there in your team. Yeah. So you need to be careful to align their competencies in the right way. Okay, so that you can take the maximum value out of these two people. Okay, so let me go forward. So guys, I had actually conceived a small class discussion, and I think we should give it 10 minutes, where you may like to read through this And if you have a query, you can ask me that what are the primary activities of a PO and a BA? What are the shared activities of a PO and a BA? All right. So you see here, this is PO's primary activities. This is BA's primary activity. This is the shared activities from a product owner side. This is the shared activities from a BA side. Okay, just have a small read about it, and I think we can probably discuss in case you wish to have any discussion on this. And just give me a second, guys. Hey guys, any query here? Okay, so Arpita is saying BA participates in backlog refinement and prioritization. Then, what's the difference in BA and Scrum Master in this regard? So, Arpita, good question. So, I'm not sure whether I may actually just give me a sec. I may actually have. Okay, perfect. No, your question is valid. So, guys, now that we are able to clarify the roles of a BA and product owner, I mean, it's logical for Arpita to ask me that where does the Scrum Master sit then? So, Arpita, remember, from a requirement perspective, Scrum Master is not very active because you are now wholly and solely dedicated to achieve the deliverables from the Scrum cycle. And trust me, it's a big job. Now, please don't also combine your Scrum Master role with what you have learned in the first module of business analysis. That is a pure BA role. So remember, in your team as a Scrum Master, you may have a BA. Likelihood is high. And the BA will overlap with product owner in terms of the entire requirement perspectives, right? So that way, the BA has a completely defined role, but nothing much from a requirement perspective touches base with the Scrum Master, because Scrum Master is caring for Scrum artifacts, he's caring for Scrum framework, he's caring for the Scrum processes to be adhered to, right? So it's the role and responsibility of a Scrum Master typically doesn't have much of a requirement perspective. Yeah, but when you are learning three different skill sets, so first skill you learned was that of a business analyst, the second was a Scrum Master. The fact is that in your career, your likelihood to start the role of a change manager is high from a business analyst perspective. Okay, and that is where we did the first module, because the fact is that you may like to undergo the experience of a business analyst, because and then subsequently your next role is likely going to be that of a scrum master, because eventually in maybe next 2 years your goal will be to do all the three different roles of BA, Scrum Master and Project Manager in order to qualify to be the full skill set of a change manager. Does that answer your question, Arpita? Okay, I think if you have digested this slide well enough, we can. Anything very interesting here, guys? Oh, let me see. Identifying the close gaps, acceptance. See, there's a lot. If you see, there's a lot of primary activity on the BA role. Yeah, understanding stakeholder needs. This is all what you have done in BA, right? Elaborating. So, Savan, Scrum Master as a tech lead, maybe I wouldn't say that, because I'll tell you why. Technical lead, typically is it is actually a defined role called technical architect. Yeah. So, technical architect is responsible to create the overall architecture, of course, the technical architecture of the project, because many times you bring in new softwares, new technologies, you decommission existing technologies, etc., etc. So you need someone to fit and retrofit all this into an architecture. So that's also, of course, a different skill altogether. So frankly, Scrum Master will stay as Scrum Master. So you don't really have to give it any other name. Yeah, because but see, eventually from a software development life cycle, if you see, then obviously the Scrum Master is the key accountable person. So let's Let us make Scrum Master remain a Scrum Master only. So let's not give it any other name, because frankly, in a role-based kind of an organization, this is where it. Okay, anything specifically interesting here from shared activities? Decision shaping, for example, like decision shaping, right? It has to be between, obviously, the product owner and the business analyst, right? So, frankly, they will consult each other a lot, and you may like to facilitate their consultation. Probably that's about it, because you don't have to step into the requirement perspective. Rest is pretty okay, yeah. All right, let's talk a little bit on the ceremonies, guys. We talked about the ceremonies during the Scrum framework. Yep. Let's look at it a little bit in detail. So when you say sprint planning meeting, remember what we call sprint zero, because sprint one is a full scale actual working which starts from a sprint perspective. Sprint zero is where you plan everything about the sprint. What do we do there? Sprint prioritization. Yep. Which means selecting the sprint goal. What do we want to achieve? And hence out to achieve that, how many changes we need to accomplish. Yeah, this is what you should see. Analyzing and evaluating the product backlog, uh, selecting sprint goal, deciding how to achieve sprint goal, which means, hey guys, how much of design and redesign we are going to do, and if we need to do this much to achieve the goal, then how much of sprint backlogs or tasks which we have to extract from the product backlog. Product backlog is the universe of requirement. Sprint backlog is the selective requirement which you pluck from the product backlog and bring into the sprint backlog, because in that particular sprint you want to accomplish only that much. Got it, guys? So once you're able to bring that into the sprint, you estimate that, then you create the sprint total longevity or the duration, and then you fit it into your release planning. So guys, frankly, once you understand this framework and actually do it twice, thrice, you're all good to go. But you see this, guys, from a Scrum framework, you have team capacity, product backlog, business conditions, current product and technology. So a lot of things, get adjusted in there. Okay, sprint planning. Continuing with sprint planning. So quickly, I will read it. It's like a story, guys. Team selects items from product backlog, which they can commit to completing. Number one. Number two, sprint backlog is created, which means tasks are identified and everything is estimated. Remember, the estimation is between 1 to 16 hours. Typically, it's not, see, if you are going to pick up items from product backlog, which are, like 50 hours and 100 hours and stuff, then it's not like a typical, incremental tasks. These are big tasks. We don't do big tasks, in the sprint cycle. Okay, so and then you start stepping onto the high level design, which is like, uh again, a website design, Trivago or something like that. As a vacation planner, I want to see the photographs of the hotels. Is there a, so should we have a requirement which enables uh, for the users to see those photographs, which means for the trip organizers, can they upload the pictures? I'm just taking an example of any one of the functionalities there, right? So if you think like this, if you plan like that, then remember what you got to decide as a team, that okay guys, if we have to do some kind of an activity or task which you have to conceive to create this part as a portion in the website, then number one, we need to code the user interface, we need to write some kind of a testing cycles, we need to update some performance test kind of a scripts, we need to code some of the the top layer of this design, middle layer, bottom layer. So that way, you have something like a quick estimation. So quick estimation of the detailed tasks which are broken down as a requirement, we give it that estimation because we need to have an estimation to eventually plan the release planning. So all these things are very diligently done within sprint planning. Okay, this is, I think you're fairly familiar, right? It's this daily stand-up meeting is not typically for a exactly like a problem-solving thing. It's more to overlap with each other, to communicate, and to understand what impediments are there and what the team can do to help out each other. What else would you do in 15 minutes, for heaven's sake? Okay, now let's go further. Since we are talking about the sprint part, so let's also cover the sprint review. So when a sprint review happens, you typically team presents what do they accomplish during the sprint. Oh, by the way, sprint review is at the end of the sprint cycle. Okay, so team presents what did they achieve. Okay, typically there is a quick demo necessitated because that makes things understand pretty well. Yeah, then there's an informal 2 hour prep time, you know where there's no slides. Okay, 2 hour prep times where there are no slides, people just kind of talk, present, discuss, deliberate, infer, and conclude. Okay, so every team participates, we invite the word in the sense that we invite the various stakeholders so that they can have a good look. See, what happens is that it's not very informal session. In any case, a lot of things guys in Agile are actually informal, right? So there we present an informal picture but clarify the entire stance of the product and the functionality. Okay, and then the fourth and the last thing is the sprint retrospective. So when we want to look back and learn, so then the lessons learned perspective, we take a look at what worked and what didn't work. That pertains to everything: operational things, specifications writing, testing, even communications, and the way we all behaved with each other. How to make every component better. So guys, think about it now. As a scrum master, you have to drive this kind of a process excellence. Now you realize that why scrum master role is completely independent, because you have a lot of softer aspects to do into the team as well, so as to continually evolve them. Because if, let's say, the complexity of the sprints remain the same, to be very honest, I would see a better sprint burn down chart with every passing sprint, because I will assume that you as a scrum master are evolving and making the scrum process work better and better. Now, whether for that you have to improve the person or the process, I really don't care, right? So in retrospective, who participates? Practically everybody, done after every sprints. Again, it's a short meeting between 15 to 20 minutes, 30 minutes maybe, but it's more of like to see what did we do right, what didn't we do right, and what can we do better in the next sprint. That's all. So in retrospective, guys, we have a principle called stop, start, continue, which means, hey, whatever you're doing, stop that, right? Then talk to each other, align, whether you are aligning on a business objectivity, whether you are aligning on a technical specification, whether you are aligning on a code and a test result, but align. Stop, align, start. Again, stop, align, and continue to doing so. So many ways to do a sprint retrospective. Okay, little bit more on the artifacts, guys. This is a very good diagram, guys. Here, so we start here from the bottom. In this green tower that you see, we originally we have an epic, which means we have a large universe of requirements. Yeah. Now, at any point of time, you obviously understand, right, that the business has already given requirements, so they are all in a bucket. We call that bucket an epic. Now, when we say, guys, okay, now let's sit down together and do a sprint planning. That time we will open that epic bucket. We will look at the items. We will again check what is the latest and the greatest understanding from business. And of course, product owner will help in that. And then we will appreciate what items we need to prioritize or prioritize within the epic, right? And that's exactly what is being done here. And then when we are reprioritizing, we realize that we have to insert some new items into the product backlog, right? What are we doing? We are shaping the product backlog more and more to make its exactitude closest to the business, so that the top few items we can take into the sprint backlog. That is exactly what is being done here. And once you are able to, reprioritize, prioritize, etc., you then estimate, and then your items are all set. But after estimation, you say, okay, our release planning is for next 4 weeks. So in 4 weeks, we have a 5-member team. So in 4 weeks, we have 20 working days. Each working days is 8 hours. So 20 into 8 is 160 hours. We have 5 people. So 160 into 5 is 800 hours. Bingo. So let's look at the requirements, all cumulated, which are to be done as per 800 hours. So we pick up requirements because now each requirement is already estimated. So we'll pick up requirements, so example, let's say random example, each requirement is average 50 hours, for example, which is actually on the larger side. Typically they're less than that. So suppose 20 hours. So 800 hours divided by 20 is typically about that much of requirements we will pick up. And then we will allocate within the different sprints, which we have to do from now till 1st of August till 30th August. Of course, when I talk requirements, it's a list of all the design. I think you have understood about requirements very well during business analysis cycle. So guys, we have spoken quite a bit on product backlog and its so-called refinement. So I think you may have, you might be able to appreciate obviously the product backlog a lot by now, because that's the universe from where you extract your requirements, which you have to include into your sprint backlog. But you might agree with me that we need to look a little better and deeper into what is this product backlog refinement, right? Is it only business priority wise done, or is it done maybe in a little more different way? So what are the different things you do in a reprioritization of a product backlog, so which makes it a worthy reprioritization exercise? Yeah, we'll finish this slide, guys, and then we can take a break. Okay. Most product backlog items initially need refinement because they are huge, because it's a product backlog, for heaven's sake, right? Business has already dropped some 200 requirements into it. Secondly, they are not very well understood because business gave requirements in form of user stories and we kept dropping it into the product backlog. So backlog refinement includes, number one, obviously, clarification of requirements, right? Second, breakdown of this large product backlog into smaller ones. So epics are broken down into user stories so that the sizing and the estimation can be done. So team does story point estimation for the product backlog items and provides, of course, other technical information, to the product owner to prioritize them, because product owner is coming purely from a business perspective, but he needs some technical angles to each user story, and that information he can get from your team so that he can reprioritize in the best possible way. Suppose he's got two business items which are important, two user stories. Yeah. And he wants to make them release also in some time. Now, the fact is, when he understands the technical requirements which will be needed to make them go live, he also realizes that one of the requirements is very technically articulate, so it cannot be adjusted in the current release planning. So what he does is he checks on the business priority. If it is crazy critical, then he must adjust that. This means he may not actually take other requirements into this sprint cycle, because he has to make sure that this one has to go live. So giving a technical perspective is very important, because the actual build up of the product functionalities is not only from a business perspective. Obviously, it has a lot of technical perspective. Remember, we are in SDLC. We are not in the business cycle anymore. Hence, you and your team have a very significant role to play here. So you bring the right people in your team anyways, which give a feedback to the product owner in terms of which product is going to be how complex and critical, etc. So criticality he brings from a business perspective. Complexity you means your team will give from a product perspective. So when does product backlog refinement happen, guys? Typically 2-3 days before you are completing the current sprint, because you have to plan for the next sprint. So a good thumb rule is, about 10 to 12% of the effort in each sprint should be spent on backlog refinement. If it is all the team can involve themselves, that's fantastic. Otherwise, let's say your some programmers or testers or designers are busy, it's all right. Whoever is free can participate, but you will take participation of multi-skilled people into this, so that a reality perspective about refinement comes into the product backlog. Yep, is that clear? Oops. Yes, Havan, you're right. In the waterfall, project manager is the showman, and in agile, scrum master is the showman. So Arpita, now you are talking a lot of business sense here. So when you are saying that you have seen technical leads or BAs stepping into scrum master role, that is exactly what you are being trained for. You may be the BA for a couple of projects, but remember, you have the scrum master skill as well, and hence you can switch roles. And actually, that is how you will become a successful change manager, and nobody can beat it out to you, because you have the right BA skill sets. Once you do the requirement perspective, you can actually step into the scrum master role. So the interchangeability of the skills and the roles is exactly what is the value. Frankly, it's a great value being provided to you via this change management program. That is exactly the real think tank what came from SAP when we sat with them to construct this kind of a course, right? So it's already happening in the industry, Arpita. You're absolutely right. So BA stepping into Scrum Master role is fantastic news, because it's actually happening. And you know what? Remember, not many people in the market can do these twin roles. But remember, you will step into the market with these twin roles. Obviously, guys, you will be noticed more than all those people in the world who can do a singular role. That is the claim which I'm staking as of today to ensure that your success is definitely defined. Yeah. I hope you got that right. Absolutely, you got the perspective I'm coming from. So, guys, I'm not talking theory. There are people in this group who have seen that happening, and that's exactly the original aim with which you are being groomed into a change manager. So change manager is an umbrella name, but under that there are multiple skill sets which you can all play deftly very well. That is the value which is going to reshape your careers from here on. Are you with me? So Arpita, whether it was an answer to Savan or your thing is doesn't matter, because eventually it's the mutual compatibility of multiple role being groomed into a single person. That is the loud and clear story here. Okay. Okay. Perfect. So guys, I think we had an interesting discussion for these 2 hours. So I think let's take a break. Yep. Well deserved break. So freshen up, cheer up, tea, coffee, blah blah blah. Meet up 20 minutes. Cheers.
Hey guys, is there a break going on right now? Okay, great. Guys, if you guys don't mind, I would like to take your feedbacks, and I will be right now launching 4 polls. So please do poll and please give your precious feedback. Okay, and the poll will be having 4 options. Okay, guys. So please, sorry, 5 options. So please vote accordingly. Okay, thank you. Guys, those who have not yet voted, please do vote, guys. Unable to select. Okay. You might have selected any one or something. You did not selected anything, or you had selected anything or something. Guys, I've launched the second poll, so please do poll in this. Savan, are you now able to vote or something? Okay, that's fine, Savan, no problem. If there is a like you can't vote or something, that's not an issue. So that's your like you can say a major problem from your side. So it's okay, no problem. Guys, I have launched the third one, so please do poll in this one also. Savan, you can even vote like you can even give feedback later on, so that's fine. Okay, guys, is anyone there? Please do poll. I have got only 2 to 3 people voting here. Okay, guys, this one is the last one, so please do poll in this one also. Sorry to disturb you all, but it is very important to take these feedbacks. Guys, thank you very much for your feedbacks, and it does value for us. Okay, thank you, guys.
Hey guys, should we be back? Mm-mm. Hey guys, let's come back. Let's come back. All right. So, all right. So, product refinement, etc., is fine. Hmm. So here, where you see few snippets, interesting here. It says product owner cannot do the product refining by himself. So, business analyst and technical architect must help. Why? Upsurge competence of the team. Oh, can't see your screen. Hang on, hang on. Hey, I didn't remove it. Okay, guys, you should see that now. So please let me know if you can see my screen. Hey, guys, other than Anchal, can you see my screen? Mic test one, two, three, guys. Can you see my screen? Mic test one, two, three, guys. Can you see my screen? Oh, really? Oh gosh. Okay. Uh it in this presenter. The poll screen is there. All right, sorry. Uh, okay, I've changed the presenter and it's me now. So, where are we, man? Um, okay, cool. Okay, you should be able to see it now. Can you see the screen now? Because yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, because the poll screen was there, so they would have removed me as a presenter. I think I'm back now. That's fine. Okay, cool. Fine, guys, perfect. So let me get to the fill screen. All right. So, guys, remember, this whole story of Agile is, based on the forecast which you can do to prevent any uncertainty and unknowns. Yeah. So, in that context, think about it. Think about it. If at the product refinement stage, you are guys are able to do a diligent thought process, do you think it's going to make a difference? It may, because uncertainty and unknowns are going to come from the fact that your requirements have to be precisely clear and precisely prioritized as well. So you can't afford to keep a requirement where some of the some of the asks of business in that requirement are relatively unknown. See, everything, when you say in 2 weeks I will deliver business value, you need more than just a Scrum framework. You need to have a properly precise user stories, leading to precise requirement, leading to precise estimate, leading to precise testing and execution. A lot of stuff is precision based, right? So the fact is that is why the significance of the product backlog is there. That was primarily my story here. So a sample product backlog in front of you. Again, I'm talking about that website, for hotel reservations. So ability on the website for a user to make a reservation, the estimate is for 3 man hours or 3 man days, whichever unit is being taken here. Ability to cancel a reservation, etc., etc., etc. Yep, accumulating to probably something like 50 man days kind of a thing. So that's like a typical estimate for a business requirement. Okay. Now, I think you deserve to know a little bit in detail about sprint goal. Yeah. So sprint goal is basically a summary statement, vision statement about what work is going to be focused on in this particular sprint. Is it about database design? Is it about some life sciences prototype? Is it about some kind of an interface in a financial services where the company wants or the client wants a real-time interface with the bank with absolutely no lead time? So that whatever is the outbound data being sent to the bank, they get it in real time, and whatever data the bank sends back to the client, they get it in real time. Yeah. So it could be either way. So a broad operational statement. Remember, the sprint goal is not like a very vision kind of a thing. It's more like an operational statement that I want to make the application run on the new database called HANA server. So by the way, HANA is a new database, very fast, from SAP. So the client wants to shift from the traditional SQL or Oracle databases to SAP HANA database. Yeah. So remember, everything in sprint is kept very simple. So hence a goal statement should also be very simple. Okay. When you say managing the sprint backlog, so now you have done and dusted with the product backlog, you have shifted the needful things into sprint backlog. Okay. So what we can do in sprint backlog? Let's read it one by one. One, individuals sign up for work of their own chosen work. It should be chosen work. Okay. So individuals sign up for work of their own chosen work is never assigned. I'm sure there's some kind of a little flaw here. I'm not sure myself able to make out what is being. I think during formatting something has gone wrong. Okay, let's go to the next. Any team member can add, delete, or change the sprint backlog. That makes sense. Update work remaining items as soon as the unknown becomes more known, which means you have taken some items for this into the sprint development, but honestly, a couple of things are still unknown about it. No worries, it's high priority, so take it in. As soon as you get to know the relative knowns about it from the user plan, then drop that, keep it in, and wait till the time you get to know the known facts about it, and you put it in. Yeah. So as you make refreshes into the work log items within the sprint, you obviously refresh the estimate part as well. Yeah. So if the work is unclear, define a sprint backlog item with a larger amount of time and breaking down later. So if any work item is unclear, please don't carry that risk with you, since you have to keep that in the backlog. So keep it there, okay, and break it down later when things get more known about it. But you got to keep it there. You got to keep it there. So overall management of a sprint backlog. Okay, let's go one step down further. Now, depending on the items that have gotten included into the sprint backlog, you got to break it down into tasks, right? So the tasks is, for example, code the user interface, code the middle tier, online help, etc., etc. You need to split that work among a particular working week. Why? Remember, your sprint cycle is going to run for 2 weeks. Now, if you see, guys, the first week for a sprint backlog has been reserved more from coding purposes, and hence the next week work will be logically for testing purposes. Okay, so between Monday to Tuesday, now that you have estimated overall that, let's say coding the user interface is going to probably take 20 hours, how do you want to split it up? Depending on who all are the coders in the team, how much is the total coding work, how much you want to split it up. Now in this case, in the first week we have done two items on coding, one on testing, okay, and then another, on some kind of a, writing the foo classes, something like maybe some subject to some kind of a configuration that is to be done. So first week is basically coding, testing, and configuration. So I think my earlier statement was not really so precise when I said the first week is for coding and the next week is for testing, but I really wanted somebody amongst you to catch that. Yeah, remember, it is all a parallel stream. So there's no differentiation between coding today and testing tomorrow. Testing follows as soon as the coding is either being done or even partially done, because that's exactly what separates agile from waterfall. Okay, so this is a typical sprint burn down. We won't see it again. I wanted to plot it, the actual tasks during the working week, and plot it on a sprint burn down for you. So Monday, total tasks are for 20, 36, and 44 hours. Yeah. Tuesday, it's for about 32 hours, right? So once you are able to accomplish how many are remaining, so on Monday as of, right? So Monday there are is a full-fledged inventory of 44 hours remaining, right? But that gets completed by end of the day. So as of today, the remaining hours for you is probably only 30, and then Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. So it's a scaled down effort. Now let's talk of graduating you from a small Scrum team to a larger Scrum team. And obviously that's called scalability. Typical individual team is about 7 to 9 people, right? The scalability, guys, come from team of teams. It's not that your current team is 9 people, so you want to scale up the team because you have more and more work coming in into your scrums. You will rather institutionalize a separate team altogether, because one particular agile team, in terms of governance, operational functioning, and proper overlap with each other, normally should not be beyond 7 to 8 people. Hence, scalability will come from institutionalizing new teams. All right, and that's why team 2, team 3, team 4, team 5, etc. Of course, it depends that how much you want to scale. That obviously completely depends on what is the type of application you want to develop, what is the kind of dispersion of the team according to the different location it is based from, what is the overall project duration the client has specified to you, yeah, with which they want to, by a certain timeline they want to definitely execute something. So keeping that in mind, you'll have to conceive the overall breakdown of scalability. So if they want to do it faster, you may have to scale up more and more number of teams, yeah, and so then your scalability will amount to a larger amount of teams. So guys, but I want to give you one confidence. When you say I am managing one scrum team, right, and then you are saying I'm managing 3 scrum teams, okay, now team addition can happen whether you are you create multiple teams and you put them in a sprint, and but they are all within the same scrum, or if the nature of the work is quite different, you institutionalize separate teams, okay, and you put them in different scrums, because you want to keep supply chain people separate, networking people separate, database design people separate, etc., etc. Okay, all I want to tell you is, guys, if you stick to the framework of scrum, Whether you manage two teams or multiple teams, it doesn't really matter. If you keep them within the same framework, if you keep them within the implied artifacts, if you keep them on the normal course of action, which is done as per the Scrum process, roles, division of labor, responsibilities, etc., I don't think there is going to be much of a problem. Okay, so that is the thought I want to bring in you as a Scrum Master for a singular team or multiple teams. Okay, I think this is something which you may have been waiting for since quite some time. How are estimations done, right? Because it's an important part. So let me now tell you how are the estimations done. The size of the project is really an appreciation of its scope, complexity, risks, and magnitude. I wanted to give you an example. Eiffel Tower is very tall. Obviously, it's heavy because it's made up of metal. It's a complex structure based in right in the middle of Paris, right? So it's in within a very dense urban environment. Great Wall of China, it's a wall after all, but it's very long and very sturdy. When like something like 10 meters and 8 meters of thickness, it's a structure which is spanning thousands of miles. I think it's in excess of 2,500 miles. Yeah. Now both are large projects. Both are big projects to deliver. Their scope, complexity, magnitude, but is quite different. One is more horizontal, one is more vertical. So you can imagine from a project perspective that what has gone into it from a thought perspective has to be very different, even though both projects are large, both are complex. But the fact is that the design, the architecture, the thought, and the build has to be appropriated according to the project structures. Yep. So, guys, before I get into the actual estimation, I want to give you some small principles about it. Yeah, these are typically called the estimation principles. Remember, estimation success is not about a very precise estimations. The estimation success is more about managing the expectations with the estimates that you're doing. Second, estimates are not just predictions. Neither are they commitments in Agile. Neither are they guarantees in Agile. Okay, this is Agile, guys. It's not a very formal way in which you did a waterfall, and hence it was more precise. Here, you have kept a fair enough of a boundary that changes will come, requirements perspective will change, etc. So you cannot give a guarantee in terms of a fixed estimate. Okay. When discussing the total size, total duration, and total cost, we always work within some ranges, please, not as an absolute number. So if you have to give an estimate, you may give between 20 to 40 hours rather than, maybe giving it in more precise way, let's say 27 hours or 28 hours and stuff like that. So keep a range, play safe. User stories that represent features of your products are individually sized. They are not collapsed within the total user story. If let's say he's asking for 4 components built up during a website development, each 4 components have to be estimated separately then they have to be bottoms up build up so as to give a cumulative estimate which you might require in order for the website build up as well. So treat each user story separate with respect, give it an individual priority so that you know which way it has to accumulate into a combined work. And these individual units will define the total size of the project. Okay, so guys, the important aspect I wanted to bring in this regard here is the story points. Yeah, story point basically is a unit of measure that expresses the overall size of a user story. When you say I want to travel from home to office, it's 13 kilometers precise. You give it a unit, right? Similarly, I want you to give a unit to your estimate. And guys, the standard unit which is ascribed and prescribed to your user story is called story point. Yep. Now, the size of the story, when estimated, will include its design, its testing, its creation, its code, reviews, its its integration with any other interfaces. All has to be included. So each size of a story is relative to another story. That's a truth. There is no one point scale which you will use to say that the story points for supply chain are, you know, so and so and so. There's no benchmark. There's no defined Bible about it. So it's relative. You might tell me that the user stories given to supply chain are relatively lesser than the user story points which we give to engineering related requirements build up, right? Because it depends on the industry it comes from. It depends on obviously the complexity which is inbuilt. So if in the engineering requirements are more microscopically built, then obviously the story points could be large. So that's one truth of this. Let me give an example. Story point A be sized as 1 point, story point B may be sized as 2, C as 3. So I would say the story point C is at least 3 times the size of story point A. Yeah. So it's all relative, guys. When you want to keep it relative, you might to keep it aligned with certain industries because that's how the agile works. So story points are the associated sizings which you can give purely from a work unit perspective. So typically you can align it with, let's say, man hours. So if we say the story point of this requirement is 5, it is considered that 5 hours will be required, number one, to create the function or a tech spec, to write the code, to test it, to develop it, to deploy it, and in case any kind of a interfacing is required, that is all also pulled into it. So those 5 hours should represent an end-to-end work effort required by various team members to eventually put it from beginning to end. Let's read a couple of pointers about story point. In product backlog and release backlogs, the development team estimates and assigns story points to each user story. Obviously, who else will do? Because all the skill sets, people are sitting in the development team. Each one of them, going by his experience or his or her experience, gives a typical story point, which is again relative. So he may have done a larger story point belonging to a complex development for which he may have used 10 story points. When he looks at your business ask in this user story, he compares it to the earlier executed story, story lining that he had done in terms of development, and then he gives it based on his experience. So experiential curve is very important from each skill set within the team to give a number, which remember is a relative number. It's not an absolute number, which means that you always keep some margins. That's where number one, you keep a relative number, not an absolute. Number two, you keep it within ranges. So there's no absolute integer form of the estimate that you want to give it to certain components in order to develop that user stories. Yeah. Second point, the main reason is that in the early stages of development, you don't know how much work you really have for a story. Once you do some troubleshooting, you build some spec, you do a little bit of quick testing, and then you realize the intensity of that ask. So in that case, your story point may change. So in order to give yourself that flexibility, you need to keep it a little loose ended in the beginning. Now, some of you may ask me a question. In order to be at least a little bit more sure, why don't we do a detailed kind of a planning and develop a design, and analysis right up front so that we can come to a more precise story point value? The reason is, guys, that if you will do that in the beginning, then how will you let the design evolve? Because there's no sanitized boundary here. The design may evolve because maybe two, three good people talk to each other within the development process and they realize that some different design could be a better idea. Or maybe some stakeholder came in with a new kind of an ask. Any reason can help the design to evolve. So if you are going to fixate the story point in the beginning based on a formal design, then that's not agile for you. The third reason why we keep it a relative sizing is because all the different skills within the team give a relative value of story points to particular items. Now, it's possible that the same thing, when looked at by a designer or by a developer, they may give it different story points. So, since the story point value differs from people to people depending on their own personal experiences, that's why what we do is we take the inputs from each skill set and eventually take an average out of that to give it one range of estimate of story point that for a particular story, user story. Fifth principle, the person who is actually going to do the work as part of the development team should be the person to give us the story point value. We don't want others to give it a story point value because the estimate may be wrong. Another reason to use story point is that what was originally an ideal time estimate may be misinterpreted because of an elapsed time estimate. So there's nothing called ideal because there's no boundary as such. Elapsed time in this case is the time it actually takes to do the work after factoring in all the interruptions which the employee may face in the normal workday. So elapsed time is reality, original time estimated in story point is the prognosis. So for example, a task estimated at 5 working days may actually take 8 to 9 days to complete once the daily meetings happen, reviews are taken, iterations are done. So it can go more than its original relatively understood estimates. So guys, it's not as loose and is also as we might like to make it, because eventually we have to keep it under a certain discipline, because eventually your estimates have to fall within the sprint cycle, because each sprint cycle cumulated, when cumulated, it has to fall within a release planning. So you're getting it whether you take a bottom up approach or a top down approach. Okay, eventually it has to stay within that framework. So the estimation technique is not really a technique, but it's more of a process where you gather inputs from various skills within the team as per what they have to input, because they conceive a certain set of number of tasks or activities which they have to do in order to prepare the test, that design or the testing or that coding or the deployment, etc. So we have to anyway take a cognizable reference of inputs from everybody, but eventually you take an average. And then it's also not an absolute truth, because when you actually sprint into a sprint beyond the sprint planning exercise, then you get to understand that it's probably more complex than what it was originally thought. This means that time you might like to refresh the story points, which leads to a re-estimation. Okay, let's understand more on ideal days. Ideal days is a measure of size expressed in days. It removes the concept of overhead such as so-called interruptions, planning exercises, activities, caring for your emails, doing non-project related activities, stepping out for a coffee, etc. So all that peripherals are removed when you say, let us express the story point in ideal days. So it means that you have taken a concentrated, focused amount of work. And if you do that kind of a mode to develop something, how much time or will you take to develop that kind of a work without interruptions? So rather than the elapsed time. So ideal time is the productive time, elapsed time is the total time which you will do for core and peripheral activities. Continuation on ideal days. When estimating at a high level, we know at least about the project, we would estimate in some ideal days. This is the, a little more easier concept. Again, because it correlates to a past experience, a past lineage, a past history, of doing some similar story points, some similar user stories. Now, the challenge is, guys, when the user stories are at a high level, we don't have details. That's a problem, because then you really cannot give a reasonably valid estimates. Second, the user stories are at high level and they are more aligned like an epic in nature. So then don't do an estimation, defer it to a later stage when you may actually have more details about each user story, so that you can actually give it an estimate. Now, when estimating at a more granular level, say a story in an established product backlog, which we have been there, done it before, etc. Any of the approach can be used depending on what is chosen by the engineering team. So we have to ask their preference. Engineering team in this case is your development team. So this clarifies for the ideal days. So Sid, I'll come to your question a little later. How to prevent any major change in this so-called evolving and more evolving design, because evolution is permitted by Agile, right? But the fact is that a major, so when we call evolution, the changes could be minor or major both. Ouch. Okay, two techniques for estimations: shared estimates within the overall team and analogous estimates. Shared estimates are not carried out in isolation. They are performed collaboratively by the entire design and development team sitting together, which includes all activities called design, database, front end, back end, user interface, quality assurance. So all the cross-skilled people sit together to jointly pool their mindsets to give it a collaborative estimate. This avoids one problem, that you are not considering all aspects of the work. Yep. And second, the combined team will all have a view that can be discussed and agreed upon, because it promotes discussion since the estimation is more collaborative. Now let's look at analogous estimate. Analogous estimate is where we consider two discrete features and decide which one is relatively smaller or bigger than the other. Okay. So let's say one discrete feature is the design of the payment gateways in the website. The second one is to provide a new kind of a user interface so that the shopping experience for the user, while it picks and chooses multiple things, develops into the cart, is quite different, right? So you choose two different discrete features. Okay, you decide which one is smaller. So let's assume that the shopping cart is smaller than the payment gateways, which is more complex. We can look at a given story and agree that it is small in size, and if using story points, we might give it a size of, let's say, 2. What do? You look at the requirement of the shopping experience. So basically it's about designing a user interface, let's call it simply like that. You look at another given story where you may have developed that in, typically, let's say, in a user points, user story points of maybe 2, 5, 10, or whatever. Now you look at the larger story of payment gateways and compare it to the first one. And when you say, okay, during the user interface design, we have to do so 7 activities translating into 10 story points. You look at the payment gateways and you say, going by a typical benchmarks, we have to do 15 tasks there or activities there, which translates to probably 20 user points. So, in analogous estimates, you compare the sizing of the two requirements by comparing the tasks and activities which are mandatorily to be done in both, and that gives you a typical idea about the relative sizing between the two. So, even if you say that to the first user story, you gave a relative points of 5, and to the next you gave 15, it is still not absolute in itself because it's still only relative looking at the nature of the variety and multitude of activities you did in the two different story points. You want to give it a little thought. You want to think about some kind of example instance which you have probably experienced beforehand, where you want to probably ask something about that. Keep it in mind. But now please read this slide on planning poker, which is the most reliable consensus based estimation technique which we use most commonly in agile cycles. Give it a read, guys. All right. So, guys, so let's look at planning poker. And what is the such a good thing about planning poker that it's almost like a universal phenomena with which we do estimations. In a sense, it combines few things: expert opinion. You draw some analogy to a previously done similar requirement and suggest an estimate. There's a team collaboration, etc. Multiple experts involved, both from technical perspective, domain perspective, business, not really business perspective, because build doesn't need business perspective. Yeah, there's a good dialogue exchange. There's a proper justification behind what anybody suggests out of those 5 people team. So let's say everybody gives it a story point. They have to justify why they are giving like that. Yeah. So planning poker, guys, is a consensus based estimation technique mostly used to estimate effort or size of tasks. So now the team is able to know that how many tasks will be there in developing a particular requirement. Once the tasks are known and they are written down, then we ask for comments from each skill set to, so they discuss among themselves. So let's say a developer is going to talk and discuss about his experience of building the similar task in, let's say, 4 story points. Now a, let's say another developer, again, let's say a good experienced developer, will probably relate to his experience, which was lesser than the previous coder. And why? Because probably because of some good practice. So what is done is, if the second coding guy has a sound principle behind his story point logic, then that is given a priority over the other. It depends how the team can arrive at a consensus, but it's absolutely a consensus based estimation. So in poker, you know the game of poker, right? There are cards. So in the cards, there are numbers. So let's say Didin looks at the same tasks and picks up a card of 5, whatever comes exactly to his mind at that point of time. So 5 is 5 story point. I pick up 4. And let's say, Sawan picks up 3, Mazbin picks up 2, right? So we all have to justify why we picked up that card, because we think it will need only 2 story point, 3, 4, or 5. Now, the person with the highest and lowest number argue about their estimates, not more than for 5 minutes. Yeah. And if no consensus is reached, then we again play a fresh round for that particular task. And if we cannot find a consensus in 3 rounds for the same task, the task is parked on the site. Yeah. So let's see if we have anything more. Okay. Continuing with planning poker. So how do we arrive at some kind of a baselining of a story point for that particular task? Baselining is done by selecting a fairly small and well understood task, estimating it first, preferably to a low number like 2, 3, etc. So we first pick up a small task, take a consensus, okay, and we agree on to, let's say, a smaller number because the task is small, and then we give it that number. Then the cards are numbered, because anyway you have to pick up cards like that, the one right in front of you on the screen, card ones, card suggesting numbers 1 to 1 to 9, 1 to 10, whatever. The cards are numbered as they are to account for the fact that the higher an estimate, there is a by default more of an uncertainty into it, because if you are so certain about the task, you'll probably pick up a more smaller and precise number. So higher it goes, obviously there's a small element of uncertainty which is coming into it. Now, estimates obtained through planning poker are shown to be a little less optimistic and more accurate, because we achieve them through a combination of individual estimates. Yeah. So the thrust on planning poker is to be more realistic than to be more optimistic. Because if the journal scenario is for more optimism, then guys, what will happen is that people will pick up relatively conservative numbers. So even if the requirement could be, let's say, typically around 5 story points, they may pick up 4. So we don't have to play a game of optimism. We have to play a game of realism. Yeah. So once again you pick up a small task, give it a story point of 2 or 3, you have baselined, which means now subsequent tasks are gonna be compared to this baseline task, and then appropriate story point is going to be adjudged for the next subsequent tasks, right? So let's say you pick up a small task, you say, okay guys, a quick code change and a very quick unit testing followed by a little functional testing, will care for this story point. So that's a typical, let's say, 3 story points, right? Now, when the same experts look at a larger task, they will, on the left, they will again look at the baseline task to say if in this nature of task, if the story point was 3, then typically in the on the right, there's a new task. Looking at the nature of that, how much should be a story point? So primarily, they will look at it and say, okay, you know what, the new task is about a, a 1.5 times the task which we have baseline. So if the task which we have baseline is 3 story point, then this should be typically between 4.5 to 5 story points. And what all comes here? Lineage, previous experience, uh, quite a bit of compatibility, confidence and competence which the experts have in developing similar requirements, and then on top of it there is a consensus. So this kind of a combination of multiple parameters ensures that our estimation process to design the sprint cycle and eventually the release cycle is reasonably closer to the reality. Guys, are you clear on planning poker? You'll be playing a lot of poker in your coming months, so better be careful about it. Hey guys, are you okay on playing poker? Hey, no one is responding for heaven's sake. What's up, man? Guys, are you okay? Are you good enough? It's an important task. I'm asking you. That's why again and again. It's quite obvious, guys, that when you will actually play poker, you will understand. For now, if you have understood the framework of how to make your team play poker, you are good. Because remember, the people in your agile team would have probably played it more than what you would have done. Yeah. So coming from a coding, testing backgrounds or user experience designers, etc., they will be pretty okay to ascribe it a story point. Okay. So then let's go to a little more related topic of prioritizing. So guys, prioritizing here in Agile or Scrum, yeah, they are prioritized according to the highest value to business, vis-a-vis effort needed to develop the same. So there are 5 user stories. Okay. First of all, you give it effort. So effort is in terms of your story point. So you give it 13, 5, 3, 8, etc. And user story 5 could not get an effort because it was parked on the side. Okay. Then guys, you look at that, the value to business, right? Now, again, this is also a theoretical value which you are saying that story point, user story 3 is going to give probably 13 on a probably a 20-point scale or 10-point scale or a 50-point scale, whatever. It's going to give a 13 usefulness to business. So user story 4 is one of the highest in giving value to business. Okay. And the least is probably user story 1 or 2, but that's fine. You don't have to really uh, you know consider the number as such. This number is a kind of an extempore number which has come from a unanimous conclusion by the team. So just give the value and effort, then divide the value by effort and find out the final value. If you see, user story 3 has the highest amount of value divided by effort, which means per unit of effort inputted, user story 3 will give the highest business value. Hence it should be priority number 1. Okay. and slightly less than that is user story 4, where value per unit of effort is around 2.5. That gets a priority number 2, and then 3, and then 4, and etc. etc. Okay. So remember this. Agile is very simple, to be honest, but it's just that you need to just execute that, in the way which is necessitated by a framework. Okay. Now let's try to create a flowchart. Okay. So what is this, guys? It says serialization strategy for smaller projects. So how to serialize small projects in a sequence. So guys, basically it's like one team which you have 7 to 8 members team, which is going to do multiple projects on multiple systems. Okay. Typical parameters: ideal team size about 5 to 7 developers. If there's less than 5, we will call it a little too small, because within 5-member team you can't have multiple skill sets. Okay. Then sprint 0 to define the initial scope and the initial architecture, which we have already discussed. Sprint 0 is, guys, the sprint planning part. Okay, so sprint planning is where you extract the requirements from the product backlog, bring it into sprint backlog, kind of estimate it, and then fit it into the overall release planning. Okay. And then we have a new term called wrapper sprint. Basically it's just to release the software. So build the software, that's part one, and then release the software. So main sprint is the core sprint, where you actually build, test, and then you have to deploy it or release the functionality into production system. We'll call it a peripheral or a wrapper sprint. So core sprint plus wrapper sprint is responsible to end to create the requirements, and then to release it into the production system as well. So let's call it maybe deployment for some time, right? So your wrapper sprint is deployment, responsible for deployment, and your core sprint is responsible for build and test. Okay. So guys, here, look at this diagram. Uh, so this is sprints. Okay. So here, before this sprint started, you did a sprint 0 or sprint planning exercise. After sprint 0, you started with the real work. So sprint, within the sprint you had 4 different weeks: week 1, 2, 3, 4, and in 4-week cycle this sprint is over. Now remember, before the next sprint started, right, you remember what we discussed earlier, that 2 to 3 days before the new sprint starts, you have to devote some time to do a sprint planning exercise for the next sprint. That is why you see this 0 here, which is basically sprint 0 planning for the next sprint. Okay, so W is basically where you are completing the work, just to designate that in a sequential order. You have to ensure that the sprint 0 planning is always done before your ongoing sprint finishes, because you need to plan for the next one. So this was smaller projects. Okay, one team on multiple systems. This is, guys, large projects where there are multiple teams as such. So you have 2 to 3 teams, each having maybe 7 to 10 people. Ideal team size for large projects also, guys, is should be technically not more than 10. Okay, and within 10 we know that ideally it's very comfortable to have multiple skill sets. Okay, So we have two or three teams, that's multiple teams, okay, and then we have to put them in different scrums. So you have team one who's doing multiple sprints, let's call it scrum one. Team two doing multiple sprints, let's call it scrum two. Team three doing multiple sprints, let's call it scrum three. So here there is scrum of scrums present in the landscape. Okay, so that's fine, don't worry, you are just creating parallel tracks and these tracks are called scrum. Yeah, so you want each team to follow a particular scrum. Each scrum is going to have 4 sprints. Okay, so this means each sprint is, let's say, a 4-week exercise. In 4 sprints you will cover a 16-week overall scrum, and during the sprint zero planning for each scrum you were able to first create the goal for entire scrum. You were able to do a release planning for all sprints within the scrum. You were able to designate after estimation what all requirements are going to be going into sprint 1, 2, 3, and 4 respectively for each scrum. So you see, you are scaling up. You're doing the same method but now multiple times. Okay, so if you see, the diagram did not differ. Here also you see, principally they are just trying to signify with that blue color that, guys, a sprint zero planning, okay, for different sprints within different scrums has to again follow the same rule. Okay, this is a very important, way. I mean, see, guys, if you look at it from one view, it is really a very simple thing. So, frankly, there's nothing really complex about it. Just treat the agile as simply as you can, and you know, because it's really, really very, very commonsensical. Yes, it follows certain principles, but then those principles are not very difficult to understand at all here. Okay, now let's learn a little bit another new thing, guys, called velocity. Velocity, as obviously the term self explains itself, it is a measure of team's capacity to get work done in a given sprint. Team's capacity to get the work done in a given sprint. Okay, sprint burn down was what are the remaining hours. So this means eventually what are you accomplishing and what is still remaining on your track. Okay, so obviously these two things are related somewhere, but we will see. Okay, let's read it first. It is expressed as a range, for example, 23 to 32 story points per sprint. All right, uh, and then this is because unless the same team has worked before on the same problem, it is hard to depict exactly what the team's velocity will be. Okay, fine, let's not look at that too much. We use velocity, guys, to plan our releases, because eventually what's important is that what is your release planning. Since it's very important, you use velocity to say, okay, my team is going to do between 25 to 30 user points per sprint, and after the end of this I'm going to do a release. Now I have 4 sequential sprints planned in my scrum. Each sprint is going to typically do 25 to 30 story points. Yep. So in a way, you use velocity to plan your releases, adapt the plans, as through the project, because eventually you have to give a loose ended project plan also in agile. Yep. So what does it say? When we start forced to define a range of velocities like little data, we use historical values, etc. When we run an iteration, we get an idea of velocity from team actual working, and this costly and doesn't work if decisions still be made. Agree? No, no, no. Okay. So very simple points, that if you don't have enough details, if you don't have enough history lineage of the similar requirement it is being built again by the same team, your estimate may be a little odd. But the optimism is as you will step into the real time sprint and a real time working, hopefully you will keep refreshing your story points as you proceed step by step into the design, development, test, etc. So, guys, you refresh your story points. This means you refresh your release time as well. But the fact is that release time is a little bit more sacrosanct, which means that in case you feel within the sprint that the effort needed to reach that pre designed release timing has to be adhered to, then you may have to do a little bit additional work or skill set within the team. Yeah. But general velocity says that is the story point which I'm going to do per sprint. How do you build up the story points? Basically by accumulating the story point for each user story. So that way it makes sense to say, hey, forecasting a velocity makes involves taking a sprint, which has stories, splitting them into tasks, doing an estimation on each task, again adding them all up and getting to know what is the velocity of this particular one. Okay. Okay, let's look at this example. A capacity of 70% of an unencumbered team is a good baseline. So in a simple situation, the total work hours in the team is like that. Four-member team into 2 weeks, which means 10, yeah, two. Which means two, and of course they have taken 40 hours per week, yeah, 8 hours per day, 40 hours per week. So 40 into 2 weeks is 80, 80 into 4 is 320 hours. So guys, 320 hours are the total work capacity available in your team. Fine. All right. Multiply by, take a 70% of that, which is about 224 hours. Now add up all the features and tasks till 224 hours and then stop. Okay. So what are you doing? You are saying, even though I may have 320 hours, but I'm trying to take tasks and features which are only going to entail 224 hours. You're taking it as a 70% estimate because you're keeping 30% probably as a larger buffer. Okay. Now you take all the completed features, add up their story points, and you get your velocity. For example, your velocity is 36 story points for this particular sprint. Yeah. Apply 20% either side to get a range of lower and highest, which means you apply 20% to 36 both ways, plus and minus. So if you on the reduction side you get 29 and on the positive side you get 43. Fine. So that is your range. Yeah. So where your initial range before the sprint was between 29 to 43, probably by sprint after sprint gradually it may somewhere, and you have kept the same effort for each sprint. Now you say, hey, I'm designing 4 sprints. In each sprint, I will typically keep a velocity of 36. I'm taking percent a plus minus 20%. So typically the range is between 29 to 43. Okay. So the idea is, guys, as you go from one sprint to next sprint and to the next sprint, your forecast builds better accuracy. So there will be a time probably on third or fourth sprint when you will actually settle down to see a almost exact value of a range between 34 to 38, which is the velocity that you are actually able to accomplish in sprint 3, sprint 4 and more. Now this is where you say I am now able to do almost very small, kind of a, so the difference between 34 and 38 is quite small. It's just 4 story points here and there. So you are now arrived at a level of experience where you can actually forecast that for each subsequent sprints, I'll typically take between 34 to 38, number one. Second, if the nature of the requirements doesn't change too much. So what is the meaning here of this slide, guys? That over a period of time, you get the sprint experiences, then you are able to almost forecast the range with which you will be able to accomplish. That range is nothing but your velocity. So this gives greater confidence in you to forecast and your final completion date. That is where I say a mature scrum master is known by the fact that whatever forecast he does, for a particular release planning is generally it happens the same way. Okay, so basically guys, it's all about how much experience slowly, and the maturity of your team, of your skill, of the skills within your team, of their ability to troubleshoot and quickly rectify, give workarounds, eventually to achieve the you know a good forecasted velocity which stays the same consistently sprint after sprint. Oops, that was a lot. Okay, let's look at a little. Okay, so Anchal, you asked me this query at 6:12. It's 6:30 now. So whatever I explained in between, are you now comfortable that how the effort is calculated and how are the values given to the story point? Okay, cool. That's great. All right, fantastic. You guys doing okay, or you need some kind of a bio break of 5 minutes? See, guys, I appreciate your patience and your, agile is, you know, I wouldn't say it's a complex topic. No, but I will say it probably will need a little bit more focus from your side, because honestly business analysis were very much like a storylining. It was comfortable, cool, we could understand it quickly, and we went kept going forward. Agile is also the same, at least I'm trying to make it the same, but there are few things which you can understand as of now from a framework perspective, and then you'll be able to explain the same to anyone, no problem on that. But when you will actually take a hands-on experience, it will become fantastically clear to you. So don't think agile is ambiguous in any way, because I'm trying really hard to keep the top explanation of the topics as comfortable as possible for all of you. Okay, fine. So let's take a short break, guys. All right, guys, let's be back. All right, mic test 1 2 3. Mic test 1 2 3. Guys, are we together? Are we together? Let's pull off the next 15 minutes on this few things. Savan, I understand. Obviously, guys, in one shot, you may not be able to be like so clear. Okay. So, what I suggest is one thing. Can you guys, so in the LMS, we have this folder, right, where we have, uh, something called additional reading. So, guys, to be honest, my repetitively just, giving the explanation and example may not suffice. Do me a favor. Please go through some additional reading. Okay. And next Saturday when we meet up, then in that case, tell me that if you are clear or you have some specific query. But please don't tell me that, hey, you know what? Just let's do the whole concept again. I don't mind doing that, but I want you to first give it a proactive add-on reading yourself. Okay, since you have already seen that there's nothing really very unique to it, but yes, it's a little relative way of estimating. Okay, and we are all very used to a very absolute way of estimations, in our daily life. That's why probably you're feeling a little challenged. Do some kind of a pre-read on this, any kind of an add-on reading, and come back next week, and I'll probably try to see that I may have another add-on example which I'll try to explain it to you. Savan, you are trying to put boundaries, man. Agile doesn't have a boundary. So when you say what is the max value, so typically for any task the usual uppercase is about 15 hours per task. Okay. And when you say units, you can decide as a team. You can call it man hours, you can call it man days. Okay. But as such, if you ask me, the standard unit of this, it's as per the nature of the task. If the tasks are smaller, you can call it man hours. If the tasks are larger and you think they are cannot be contained within man hours, you call it man days. Okay, because in each man day there will be 8 man hours. But typically for one unit breakdown of a task, the typically it should be about 15 hours kind of an upper cap. Okay. Well, there is no minimum or maximum value, but there is a range. So your task can be anywhere between 1 to 15 hours. So you can take a 1 as minimum and 15 as maximum. See, Agile works on ranges, number one. Number two, it works on task level. Number two, at a task level, when let's say in one particular requirement, there are 5 tasks, you give it a typical story point estimate between min and max. And that is through the total team coming to a consensus to give it a story point of, let's say, 3, 5, 7, 8, etc. to different tasks. Club it together, and that is typically the story point for your overall requirement or the user story. Let's not call it requirement, because there could be 5 user stories within a single requirement. Yeah. So this is how it is. But okay, no worries. What I'll do is I'll try to get another example into it. You guys do some pre-reading. When we see it next, when we meet next week, remember, right now we are on go to training link, so that's why I'm not able to play videos. Otherwise I had some 5 6 very good videos which would have probably made it a little more easy and clear to you, because right now I'm the only guy who's struggling. Now if I would have shown you videos, there would be 5 other great guys, who would be able to explain it in a slightly different viewpoint. So that helps you to get that understanding more clear. So next Saturday we will not be in go to training, we will be releasing go to meeting links, and when on go to meetings we should be able to play the videos. Yeah. Okay, fine guys. We let's look at some of the scrum best practices. So guys, there are certain key challenges to a scrum master. Okay, and I think you should be able to relate to it. See, for example, if you are having Scrum teams or Scrum teams in multiple geographies. So if you have, let's say, in Australia, India, and UK, Australia is 5 hours ahead of us. UK is 5 hours behind us. The cumulative difference between Australia and United Kingdom is almost 10 hours. Now, Agile, of course, there's another great methodology, you know, which is used for teams which are scattered around different time zones. But principally, if they are in different time zones, you know you have a challenge. Because today, what we are learning, I'm expecting you to implement that in a local team, which probably is not a difficult idea for you if you try to visualize it. But if I try to tell you to implement this in 2 or 3 teams which are spread in different countries, I think you may have a challenge. Okay, time zone is one problem. Think about it. You have a team, let's say one agile team sitting in Finland, and a lot of them actually speak the Finnish language. They are basically just about familiar with English, but in a broken English perspective. Your second team sits in China. They are also equally understands English in a very broken way. You think it is going to be a serious challenge for you to implement Scrum? I really think so. Okay, language is the next problem. Third problem is the culture. So, guys, each individual country teams obviously have their own typical culture as well. Even though you may say, hey, all my teams in different countries are eventually IT teams, right, with defined roles. But honestly, guys, having that competency and skill is one thing, but the culture of different teams are very different. So let's say Japanese are extremely humble, polite, and mannerful. I'm not saying other geographies are other countries are less, but the fact is Japanese really go to quite some length to make it a very, very dignified experience. Yeah. Now, the fact is that you have three, four different teams and countries which are acting in tandem with each other. Obviously, you can understand, guys, that culture is a problem. So, while you might carry on a Scrum good practice to do a team formation, like meeting up each other right from beginning, time to take, some time to learn each other's values, at least know the do's and don'ts, because that's what practically we do for agile teams. Yeah, you get to understand the different teams' holiday schedules so that you plan your work accordingly that way. Establish, if possible, guys, a common velocity between Finland team, India team, Japanese team. And obviously it's not an easy ask. I'm saying ensure that most of your different teams are able to accomplish a close by velocity, which means the number of user story points to be delivered in each sprint are not very different from each other. Okay, now you can understand what I'm saying. This means for a similar nature of tasks, okay, their way of thinking and assigning story points should be the same. Their skill and diligence as a business analyst, as a product owner, as a scrum master, of course, as a tester, designer, and coder, etc., should also be reasonably same. Their ability to focus on core jobs so as to accomplish the core jobs in a reasonably closely aligned estimate story points should also be the same. So it's a lot that I'm asking, but the fact is, guys, that this is what the scrum master has to ensure. So now you understand my point when I say that the scrum master has to be present with different teams, and that's why your travel comes up, and then you have to not only just be with your different teams, you have to establish a common working practice amongst your three different teams. And now I think when you're trying to probably understand, because this is one beginning of the tough tasks which a scrum master has to accomplish. Okay. So now look at on the right hand side. You are saying there are useful engineering practices, right? You bring a test driven development practice, you bring refactoring, you bring continuous integration, you bring test automation. That is great. because you know what, these engineering practices are going to be common in all your three agile teams. So it's great in a way because these kind of automations, these kinds of practices will ensure that all of three of your agile teams are working in a common way. So that way at least you can ensure that the velocity of all three teams will be reasonably close. So see, this is great, having a shared code resource source system. So you remember we were talking yesterday about in the continuous integration that you need to have a common code base, so that if Finland team, and it's so useful in version controls, let's say Finland team is working on similar codes, yeah, and India team is also patching to the same, even though the tasks are are designed and scattered carefully. But the fact is a Finland developer could be rewriting the code, okay, and the India coder may also take a similar approach, okay, or a different approach. The fact is that the both will be first and foremost putting the codes into the common repository. What will happen, the two different versions of the codes will be there in case the team wants to have a discussion and decision on which code they might like to accept, because let's say one code is more flexible than the other. Maybe there's a defined parameter on which we will be able to pick up one code over the other, but the fact is a common code base ensure that nothing goes waste, nothing goes unuseful. So this is fine. If you're creating all this useful engineering practices, you are obviously making a common ground on which all the three teams of your can sit and work together. So these are common rules, common principles. So even though all this is fine, there are softer problems like language, cultures, communication methodologies, which are followed by different teams in a very different way, and that is where the challenge of Scrum Master starts. Okay, we can't we can't eradicate the challenges which we will definitely get from we will have issues from the challenges that I just said, but thankfully there are some useful tools, okay, which make it slightly more simpler for us to establish at least a common practice, something which can help to achieve more common grounds. Chat, conference calls, stand up meetings, video conferencing, all these things are typically typically responsible to bring sort of a common communication between the team. So see, the culture will still be different, right? Language will be different, but at least if English is usually the common acceptable language, because frankly all the IT teams, at least from different geographies, cultures, are fairly all comfortable with English to a reasonable extent. Now if you provide them a chat, then you add up with a conference call, then you add up with a video conferencing call, I hope you understand that you are able to at least eliminate the differences of thinking or the point of view between different teams to a large extent, right? So, guys, you so what you can't, kind of what you can't, control. At least you can try to arrest it. So, guys, it's a very important milestone right now what we I'm trying to figure out with you. Remember, Scrum Master is also a great change enabler. And this is proven by multiple projects that change enablement comes more from the softer aspects rather than from a hard aspect. So, change enablement is not that if you have a great planning poker, it's not because you have a great skill of coding in your team. It is probably because you are able to make your different teams work together better. Okay, because frankly it's more these kind of bottom lines which help you to control and administer and monitor the change as it gradually goes into the team. So impact analysis for each change, viewing that and mapping that against the different priorities of the team, right? And making sure that the change eventually is graduated steadily gradually into the system, so that the user is able to not able to feel the direct impact of the same in a sudden manner, in a rather in a staggered manner, is the change enablement part which you have to bring in from a change manager perspective. So 5 key principles for successful change enablement: details of the change should evolve as the things project progress. If you notice that the details are not emerging as the change is progressing, you should take a checkpoint. Because if any change is progressing, sorry, any work is progressing, the change has to be more clear to you that with this kind of a new invoicing process, what is going to be the change for the user, whether it's going to be great or not so great. Is it going to make a task simpler? Is it going to reduce increase precision of invoicing? It should become clear, right? Okay, the change should always involve all the parties collaboratively, which is fine. Each sprint or time box will deliver at least a minimal change, agreed. Because if you're working on an invoicing change and you have staggered that across multiple sprints, then each sprint cycle must bring the right successful results to accomplish at least that component of the change that you're bringing in. Now, a greater principle here is the change must address the needs of those users which it is going to impact. So let's say you try to accept the invoicing process of US, and you guys are trying to replicate that across the other geographies, right? Now, even though the standard invoicing process will remain the same, but there'll be a local process which has to come in because of the some of the countries have extremely different kind of taxation rules. For example, Brazil have nota fiscal, which is like a very complex kind of local regime of taxations. So as you try to implement the global template of US invoicing onto the other countries, you have to keep that local perspective in mind, because that local perspective being there is going to make sure that the local users of Brazil are still comfortable with your overall invoicing process. So if you're making a change, ensure that the it's aligned to the users to whom it is going to impact, because eventually your larger role is that of a change manager. Yeah. And of course you need to balance out between resourcing and priorities. Because see, frankly, scrum role is quite giant in nature if you ask me. Because when you are a scrum master, it's a scrum master of multiple scrums. As the project size grows, you might be doing maybe 7, 5, 10 scrums probably in parallel. That time you have to keep a balancing act between the release planning of each sprint accumulating into scrum planning, plus the resources which are divided amongst different scrum cycles, to ensure that all of them are able to deliver, unless you want to do a skill balancing act between the different teams. Yeah. So why am I saying this? Because eventually, if you see, guys, all these pointers will be responsible to either create a successful change enablement or not a successful change enablement process. All right. And that is where the success of a scrum master depends. All right. So where are we, by the way? Oh, 156 slides. Not bad at all. Today's session was nice. I think we have another 5-7 to cover, guys. Then we will be completing, 3 units of this agile cycle. But mind you, we have another, I think we have another at least 4 to go. Okay, 4 and then followed by a case study, etc. So I think we are a little slow, definitely, because I think we need to be a little faster than this. Okay, but never mind. At least the highlight points should be all very clear. So guys, do a additional reading into the estimation part. Please come back, and I will try to come back with some example. And more importantly, I want to show you this videos, the select videos, which anyway will take care of everything. So if you find some time, do an add-on reading. Otherwise, never mind. My videos will solve your issues. Okay. All right, guys. So shall we now say ciao, goodbye, etc. to each other? So I think good session. It was good because it told us a lot about the Scrum process, artifacts, and the deliverables. Told us about roles and responsibilities. I think now, when as a Scrum Master you are sitting in middle of all these skills, I think you should be comfortable to realign the strategy accordingly so that you can get the best work done. I think we are okay. So, all right, guys, you take care. Have a nice week ahead. All right, and I'll speak to you next Saturday, 3 p.m. sharp. All right, take care and goodbye.